I watched my mentor accept the Tech Innovator of the Year award on live television for the startup idea he stole from me. As he held that trophy and talked about his revolutionary vision, I was sitting in my garage workshop putting the finishing touches on something that would make his billion-dollar company obsolete. 5 years of silence later, I just stepped onto that same stage to accept the Industry Disruptor Award, the one he'd been coveting for years, and thanked everyone who didn't believe in me for giving me the fuel to build something better. My name is Alex Chun, and 5 years ago, I was just another starry-eyed computer science graduate with big dreams and zero connections in Silicon Valley. I'd landed what felt like a dream internship at Nexus Dynamics, a mid-sized tech consulting firm run by David Kellerman, a legend in the startup world who'd built and sold 3 companies by age 40. David was everything I wanted to become. Charismatic, brilliant, connected to everyone who mattered in tech. When he personally selected me for his Innovation Incubator program, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Out of 200 applications, only 5 interns were chosen to work directly with David on next-generation projects. Alex, he told me during our first one-on-one meeting, you have something special. That combination of technical skill and creative thinking is rare. I want to mentor you personally. I was 22 years old and completely starstruck. David Kellerman wanted to mentor me personally? I would have worked for free just to learn from him. The innovation program was intense. We worked 80-hour weeks, lived on energy drinks and takeout, and pitched ideas constantly. David encouraged us to think big, to challenge existing paradigms, to imagine solutions that didn't exist yet. My breakthrough came during week 6 of the program. I'd been frustrated with the limitations of existing smart home technology, devices that required separate apps, complicated setup processes, and constant maintenance. Most people bought these gadgets and then never used them because they were too complex. That's when I had the idea that would change everything. An AI-powered home automation system that learned your behavior patterns and anticipated your needs without any programming. No apps, no setup, no configuration. You just plug it in, and within a week, it would know when to adjust your thermostat, when to start your coffee maker, when to lock your doors, all based on your natural rhythms. The key innovation was what I call behavioral mapping, using a combination of passive sensors and machine learning to create a personalized automation profile that adapted in real time. Instead of programming your smart home would program itself around you. I was so excited about the concept that I worked for 3 straight days building a prototype and preparing a presentation. When I finally pitched it to David, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Alex, this is brilliant, he said, leaning forward in his chair. This could revolutionize the entire smart home industry. The behavioral mapping concept alone could be worth billions. He asked detailed questions about the technical implementation, the patent possibilities, the market potential. I shared everything, my code, my research, my vision for how the product could scale. David was the first person who truly understood what I was trying to build. I want to help you develop this further, he said. Let's set up some private sessions where we can really dive deep into the business model and technical architecture. I was thrilled. David Kellerman was going to help me turn my idea into a real company. Over the next month, David and I met 3 times a week in his private office. These weren't group sessions with the other interns. These were intensive one-on-one strategy meetings where we mapped out every aspect of what would become SmartFlow. David pushed me to think bigger, to consider enterprise applications, to understand the competitive landscape. He introduced me to patent attorneys, connected me with potential investors, and even arranged for me to present to Nexus Dynamics Board of Advisors. Alex, you're not thinking like an entrepreneur yet, he'd say during our sessions. This isn't just a cool product, this is a platform that could power millions of devices. You need to think about ecosystem building, not just hardware sales. He was right, and I soaked up every piece of advice like sponge. David helped me refine the technology, strengthen the patent applications, and develop a go-to-market strategy that made sense. He even had his legal team help me file preliminary patents under my name. But looking back, I can see the subtle changes that started happening around week 4 of our private sessions. David began asking increasingly technical questions about my code architecture. He wanted to understand not just what the system did, but exactly how it worked, the algorithms, the sensor configurations, the data processing methods. I need to understand every detail to help you properly, he explained. Investors will ask hard technical questions, and we need to be prepared. I shared everything. My complete code base, my proprietary algorithms, my database schemas, even my notes about future features and improvements. David said he needed to review everything to help me identify potential weaknesses before we pitched to investors. He also started suggesting changes to the patent applications, adding his name as a technical advisor and restructuring the intellectual property ownership to include Nexus Dynamics as a development partner. This protects you, he explained. Having an established company backing your patents makes them stronger. Plus, if we develop this through Nexus, we can provide the resources you'd never get as a solo founder. It made sense to my 22-year-old brain. David was looking out for me, helping me navigate complex legal and business issues I didn't understand. The red flags started during week 6 of our collaboration. David began excluding me from meetings he'd previously included me in. When I asked about it, he said they were preliminary discussions that weren't ready for my involvement yet. Don't worry, Alex. I'm laying the groundwork. When it's time for your input, you'll be the first to know. Then I noticed that David was having conversations with the other innovation program interns about my project. When I asked him about it, he said he was getting feedback from the team to strengthen our proposal. Collaboration makes ideas better, he said. I want to make sure we're approaching this from every angle. But I started feeling like I was being managed rather than mentored. David would ask me to hold off on certain development work while he coordinated with the business development team. He'd request changes to my technical documentation to align with Nexus standards. He'd suggest I focus on theoretical improvements while he handled the practical implementation planning. The breaking point came when David asked me to sign an updated agreement for the innovation program, one that included new intellectual property clauses I didn't fully understand. It's just standard legal language, he assured me. The lawyers want to make sure all our collaboration is properly documented. When I asked to have my own lawyer review it, David's expression shifted slightly. Alex, that's expensive and unnecessary. I've been protecting your interests this whole time. Do you not trust me? The way he said it made me feel guilty for questioning him. Here was this successful entrepreneur, spending his valuable time mentoring me for free, and I was doubting his motives? I signed the agreement. 3 weeks later, everything changed. David called me into his office for what I thought would be another strategy session. Instead, I found him with 2 other executives I didn't recognize and a stack of legal documents on his desk. Alex, we need to talk about the future of the SmartFlow project, he said, his tone more formal than usual. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. After extensive analysis, one of the executives began, we've determined that the SmartFlow concept requires resources and expertise that exceed what would be appropriate for an internship project. What does that mean? I asked. David leaned forward, adopting what I now recognize as his disappointed mentor voice. Alex, you've done impressive preliminary work, but this project needs to be developed by a professional team with enterprise-level experience. Your technical approach, while creative, has some fundamental scalability issues that need to be addressed. He was using my own code and documentation, the materials I'd shared with him in confidence, to explain why I wasn't qualified to lead my own project. We're going to transition SmartFlow to our internal development team, the second executive said. You'll receive appropriate recognition for your contribution to the initial concept. My contribution to the initial concept. I repeated. This is my idea. I built the prototype. I developed the algorithms. David's expression hardened. Alex, ideas are cheap. Execution is what matters. The work you've done is a good foundation, but it's nowhere near ready for market. We're going to take this to the next level. They offered me a $10,000 innovation bonus for my valuable contribution and a guarantee that I'd be credited as a conceptual contributor in any eventual product documentation. $10,000 for an idea that David had told me could be worth billions. I won't sign this, I said, standing up from the table. Then you'll receive nothing, the first executive replied coldly. The intellectual property agreements you signed give Nexus Dynamics ownership of any innovations developed during the program. This is a generous offer considering your limited experience. I looked at David, the man I trusted completely, the mentor who'd promised to help me build something great. David, you know this is my idea. You know I developed everything we discussed. His response broke something fundamental in me. Alex, you're young. You'll have other ideas. This one needs to be developed by people who understand how to build real companies. I walked out of that office in shock, barely able to process what had just happened. The mentor I'd idolized, the person I'd trusted with my biggest dreams, had systematically stolen my work and was now gaslighting me into believing I was unqualified to pursue my own innovation. That afternoon, I cleaned out my desk and left Nexus Dynamics forever. I didn't take the $10,000. I didn't sign their acknowledgement agreement. I just left carrying nothing but my laptop and the crushing realization that I'd been played by someone I'd admired. The next 6 months were the darkest period of my life. I'd moved to Silicon Valley with dreams of changing the world, and instead, I'd had my biggest idea stolen by someone who'd pretended to care about my success. I watched from the sidelines as David announced SmartFlow as Nexus Dynamics' next major product launch. He gave interviews about his revolutionary vision for intelligent home automation. He appeared on tech podcasts discussing his innovative approach to behavioral mapping. Every interview felt like a knife in my chest. He was using my words, my concepts, my vision, and taking credit for all of it. The worst part was how he'd improved my original idea using resources I never had access to. He'd hired a team of engineers, invested millions in development, and was preparing to launch a product that looked exactly like what I'd envisioned, but executed at a level I couldn't have achieved on my own. SmartFlow became the hottest product in tech before it even launched. Sitting in my tiny studio apartment, watching David give a keynote at TechCrunch Disrupt about his SmartFlow innovation, I had a choice to make. I could spend my energy fighting a legal battle I probably couldn't win, or I could channel my anger into building something even better. I chose revenge through excellence. The key insight came when I was analyzing what David had done with my original concept. SmartFlow was impressive, but it had a fundamental limitation that I tried to discuss with David during our mentorship sessions, something he dismissed as unnecessary complexity. My original vision included emotional intelligence, the ability for the system to understand not just your behavioral patterns, but your emotional states and preferences. David had focused purely on the behavioral mapping because it was easier to implement and market. But I knew emotional intelligence was the real breakthrough. A smart home that could sense when you were stressed and adjust accordingly, that could detect when you were sick and modify your environment to help you recover, that could recognize when you needed privacy versus social interaction. That was the next evolution of home automation. David had built a system that learned what you do. I was going to build a system that understood who you are. The technical challenges were enormous. Emotional intelligence required advanced biometric sensing, psychological modeling, and AI capabilities that didn't exist in consumer products yet. It would take years to develop and would require breakthrough innovations in multiple fields. Perfect. David had taken the easy path and gotten famous for it. I was going to take the hard path and make his achievement look primitive. I spent my savings on a tiny workshop space in Oakland, basically a garage with good internet. I couldn't afford employees, fancy equipment, or even proper furniture. But I had something David didn't have anymore, the hunger of someone with nothing to lose. The first year was brutal. I worked construction jobs during the day to pay rent, then spent every night and weekend in my workshop building prototypes. I taught myself advanced psychology, biometric sensing, and emotional modeling. I read every research paper I could find on human-computer interaction and emotional intelligence. Most importantly, I started filing patents on the emotional intelligence aspects of home automation, areas that SmartFlow hadn't touched and that would be incredibly difficult to work around. David's team was building outward from behavioral mapping. I was building inward from emotional understanding. We were approaching the same problem from opposite directions, but my approach would ultimately be much more powerful. The breakthrough came during year 2, when I developed what I called ambient emotional sensing, a way to detect human emotional states using passive environmental sensors rather than intrusive biometric devices. No cameras watching you, no devices you had to wear, just ambient sensors that could read the subtle environmental changes that accompany different emotional states. It was revolutionary technology, and I knew it. More importantly, I knew David's team couldn't replicate it without infringing on my patents. While David was becoming the face of smart home innovation, giving TED Talks and appearing on magazine covers, I was quietly building something that would make SmartFlow look like a calculator compared to a smartphone. I called my system empathy, and it was everything SmartFlow wasn't. Where SmartFlow learned your routines, empathy understood your moods. Where SmartFlow automated your environment, empathy optimized it for your emotional well-being. Where SmartFlow was reactive, empathy was intuitive. The technical implementation was incredibly complex. I had to develop new types of sensors that could detect micro changes in air composition, temperature variation, acoustic patterns, and even electromagnetic fields that correlated with human emotional states. The AI system required training on thousands of hours of behavioral and environmental data to learn the subtle patterns that indicated different emotional states. I couldn't afford to hire test subjects, so I became my own laboratory, spending months documenting my own emotional patterns and environmental responses. It was lonely, obsessive work. While my former classmates were climbing corporate ladders and networking at industry events, I was spending 14-hour days in a garage, building something that might never work. But slowly, incredibly, it started working. Empathy began to understand not just what I did, but how I felt. It would adjust lighting when I was stressed, play calming music when I was anxious, and even suggest optimal times for focused work based on my energy patterns. The first time empathy correctly predicted that I was getting sick, adjusting temperature and humidity 2 days before I felt symptoms, I knew I had something special. By year 3, I had a working prototype that was light years ahead of anything in market. But I also had a problem. I had no money, no team, and no way to manufacture or market a product that required custom hardware and sophisticated AI systems. That's when I made a strategic decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to compete with David directly, I would license my emotional intelligence technology to other companies who could integrate it into their products. I started reaching out to David's competitors, companies who were struggling to differentiate themselves in the increasingly crowded smart home market. My pitch was simple. What if your products could understand how users feel, not just what they do? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every major tech company wanted to explore emotional intelligence capabilities, but none of them had the foundational technology to build it themselves. Within 6 months, I had licensing deals with 3 major hardware manufacturers and 2 software companies. They would integrate my emotional intelligence technology into their products, and I would receive royalties plus continued control over the core patents. More importantly, these partnerships gave me access to resources I could never afford on my own: manufacturing capabilities, distribution networks, and marketing budgets that would help me scale the technology rapidly. While David was focused on expanding SmartFlow into new markets, I was quietly building an ecosystem of products that would make behavioral mapping look outdated. By year 4, emotional intelligence was becoming the next big thing in consumer technology, and I was the person who owned the foundational patents. My licensing partners were launching products that incorporated empathy's capabilities, and the market was taking notice. David wasn't oblivious to what was happening. SmartFlow's growth was slowing as consumers began demanding more sophisticated features that went beyond simple behavioral automation. His team was scrambling to add emotional intelligence capabilities to their platform, but they kept running into my patent portfolio. The first time I realized David knew I was behind the competitive pressure was when I received a call from a headhunter claiming to represent a major tech company that was interested in acquiring my patents. "My client is prepared to offer a very generous purchase price for your emotional intelligence portfolio," she said. "This could be a life-changing opportunity." I did some research and discovered the headhunter worked for a firm that Nexus Dynamics had used for previous acquisitions. David was trying to buy me out before I could become a real threat. I declined the offer and doubled down on my licensing strategy. Every no from David's acquisition team was validation that I was on the right track. The real battle began when David announced SmartFlow 2.0, a next-generation platform that promised intuitive emotional adaptation. His marketing team was using language that sounded suspiciously similar to my patent descriptions, and their product demos showed capabilities that looked remarkably like what I'd been developing. But when SmartFlow 2.0 launched, it was clear they were struggling without access to my core technology. Their emotional intelligence features were clunky, intrusive, and required constant user input. Instead of ambient sensing, they relied on smartphone apps and wearable devices that most users found annoying. The tech press was brutal in their reviews. SmartFlow 2.0 promises emotional intelligence but delivers emotional frustration, wrote TechCrunch. Nexus Dynamics seems to have missed the point of intuitive automation, said Wired. Meanwhile, my licensing partners were launching products that showcased real emotional intelligence capabilities. Ambient sensing, intuitive adaptation, genuine understanding of user emotional states, everything that SmartFlow 2.0 failed to deliver. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. David's approach looked increasingly dated compared to what my technology could achieve. That's when the industry nominations started coming in. The Consumer Technology Association announced their annual awards, and I found myself nominated in 3 categories: Innovation of the Year for Emotional Intelligence Technology, Patent Portfolio of the Year for my comprehensive IP strategy, and Emerging Leader of the Year for my impact on the smart home industry. David was nominated in the same categories for SmartFlow 2.0. The irony was perfect. 5 years after stealing my original idea, we were competing head-to-head for the same industry recognition. But this time, I had the better technology, the stronger patents, and the market momentum. The award ceremony was scheduled for the annual Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, the same venue where David had first announced SmartFlow as his revolutionary vision 3 years earlier. I decided it was time to stop hiding in the shadows and make my presence known. Walking into the Las Vegas Convention Center for the CTA Awards ceremony felt surreal. 5 years earlier, I'd watched David's SmartFlow announcement from my garage workshop, feeling angry and forgotten. Now, I was a nominee for the industry's most prestigious awards, competing directly against a mentor who'd betrayed me. The ceremony was black tie, filled with everyone who mattered in consumer technology. I spotted David immediately. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by investors and journalists, clearly confident about his chances of winning. He looked exactly the same as I remembered: charismatic, polished, perfectly comfortable as the center of attention. Success had agreed with him. SmartFlow had made him wealthy and famous, despite its recent struggles with emotional intelligence. I, on the other hand, looked like what I was: a bootstrapped entrepreneur who'd spent 5 years building technology in a garage. My tuxedo was rented, my shoes were resold, and I was attending the ceremony alone while David had brought an entourage. But I had something he didn't have: the quiet confidence of someone who knew their technology was better. The first award of the evening was Patent Portfolio of the Year. As the presenter read the nominations, I felt my heart racing. This wasn't just about recognition, it was about vindication. The winner of Patent Portfolio of the Year goes to Alex Chun for his comprehensive emotional intelligence framework that's reshaping human-computer interaction. The applause felt distant and dreamlike as I walked to the stage. I'd won my first major industry award, beating David in a category that recognized the foundational strength of my intellectual property. My acceptance speech was brief, but pointed. Thank you for recognizing that the most important innovations often come from people who aren't afraid to spend years building in solitude rather than months building for attention. I could see David in the audience, his expression unreadable. This was the first time we'd been in the same room since I'd walked out of his office 5 years earlier. The second award, Innovation of the Year, was announced 30 minutes later. Again, I found myself competing directly against David's SmartFlow 2.0. The winner for technology that doesn't just automate our homes, but truly understands our humanity. Alex Chun and the Empathy Emotional Intelligence Platform. 2 awards. I was 2 for 2 against David, and the biggest award of the night was still coming. The Emerging Leader of the Year award was the most prestigious recognition in our industry, given to the person who'd had the most significant impact on the direction of consumer technology. Previous winners had gone on to become the CEOs of major companies, influential investors, and technology thought leaders. David had been widely predicted to win. His media presence, his company's success, and his status as an established industry figure made him the obvious choice. But as I sat in that ballroom, having already won 2 awards, I realized something had shifted. The narrative about who was driving innovation in smart home technology was changing, and I was becoming the story. The presenter for Emerging Leader of the Year was Sarah Martinez, the CEO of Intel's Consumer Division, and one of the most respected voices in technology. This award recognizes not just commercial success, but the vision and persistence to pursue breakthrough innovations that change entire industries, she began. This year's winner has demonstrated that true leadership sometimes means working in obscurity for years to build something genuinely transformative. I knew I had won before she said my name. I could feel it in the room's energy, in the way people were looking at me, in the subtle shift of attention away from David's table toward mine. The winner of Emerging Leader of the Year is Alex Chun, whose emotional intelligence framework has created an entirely new category of human-centered computing. The standing ovation was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. 5 years of working alone, 5 years of people doubting that emotional intelligence was possible in consumer products, 5 years of watching David take credit for my original vision. It all led to this moment. As I walked to the stage, I caught David's eye. He was applauding politely, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the recognition in his face. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew what this moment represented. The speech I'd prepared was professional and gracious, but standing at that podium, looking out at an audience that included everyone who mattered in our industry, I decided to be more direct. 5 years ago, I was a young engineer with an idea for making technology more human. I shared that idea with someone I trusted, someone I looked up to as a mentor. That person took my idea and built a successful company with it, while teaching me a valuable lesson about trust and betrayal. The room was completely silent now. Everyone knew I was talking about David, though I hadn't mentioned him by name. But that betrayal gave me something even more valuable than my original idea. It gave me the motivation to build something better. When someone steals your first idea, your response should be to build a second idea so good that it makes their theft irrelevant. I held up the award. This recognition isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's ever had their work stolen, their contributions minimized, or their potential dismissed by people in positions of power. The best revenge isn't legal action or public confrontation. The best revenge is building something so innovative, so fundamentally superior, that it makes their success look primitive by comparison. The applause was thunderous. I'd turned my acceptance speech into a masterclass on perseverance and the power of long-term thinking over short-term recognition. As I left the stage, I felt 5 years of anger and frustration finally transforming into something more productive, the satisfaction of having proven that stolen ideas can't ultimately compete with genuine innovation. The impact of that night was immediate and dramatic. My speech, particularly the section about betrayal and perseverance, went viral within hours. Tech blogs dissected every word, trying to identify the mentor I'd referenced. Most figured out I was talking about David Kellerman and SmartFlow within days. The business implications were even more significant. The award ceremony had positioned me as the legitimate leader in emotional intelligence technology, while highlighting that David's recent innovations were derivative and technically inferior. Within a week, my licensing partners reported a 300% increase in inquiries about empathy integration. Companies that had been considering SmartFlow partnerships were suddenly interested in my technology instead. The stock market reacted swiftly to the changing narrative. Nexus Dynamics share price dropped 15% in the week following the awards, while companies using my technology saw their valuations increase as investors recognized the competitive advantage of true emotional intelligence. David tried to control the story through media appearances and industry interviews, but his messaging felt defensive and reactive. When asked about my success, he would grudgingly acknowledge my contributions to the field while emphasizing Nexus dynamics, market leadership, and proven execution. But the tech press wasn't buying it anymore. Articles began appearing with headlines like "The Student Becomes the Master" and "How Alex Chen Out-Innovated the Industry Giant Who Stole His Idea." The most devastating piece was a deep-dive investigation by The Information that traced the origins of SmartFlow back to my original internship work at Nexus Dynamics. They'd obtained internal emails and documents that showed how David had systematically appropriated my ideas while positioning himself as the innovative leader. Kellerman's reputation as an innovator appears to have been built on the uncredited work of a young intern whose trust he violated, the article concluded. Meanwhile, that same intern has spent 5 years building technology that makes Kellerman's innovations look antiquated. The reputational damage was severe and immediate. David stepped down from several industry boards, declined speaking opportunities, and became noticeably less visible in tech media. But the most satisfying development was watching my former colleagues from the Nexus Dynamics Innovation Program reach out to congratulate me. Several of them admitted they'd always suspected David had stolen my work, but hadn't felt comfortable speaking up at the time. "We all knew SmartFlow was your idea," one of them told me over coffee. David made it clear that questioning him about intellectual property would end our careers before they started. It was validation I hadn't realized I needed, confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the betrayal had been as obvious to others as it was to me. The award ceremony had transformed me from an unknown patent holder into the recognized leader of an entire technology category. But I knew recognition without execution would be meaningless. I had to capitalize on this momentum to build something lasting. Within 3 months, I'd raised $50 million in series of funding from Andreessen Horowitz, with Mark Andreessen personally leading the investment. "Alex has created the foundational technology for the next generation of human-computer interaction," he announced. "This isn't just about smart homes, this is about making all technology more emotionally intelligent." I used the funding to hire a team of world-class engineers, many of whom left established companies to join what was being called the most important startup in consumer AI. We moved out of my Oakland garage into a proper headquarters in Palo Alto, where we could scale both our technology development and our licensing operations. The business model was evolving rapidly. Instead of just licensing emotional intelligence capabilities, we were becoming a platform company that could power emotionally aware applications across multiple industries. Healthcare companies wanted to use our technology for patient monitoring. Automotive manufacturers were interested in emotion-aware vehicle systems. Even entertainment companies were exploring how emotional intelligence could create more engaging user experiences. Each new application area required additional patents, deeper research, and more sophisticated implementations of the core technology. But it also created multiple revenue streams and made our intellectual property portfolio increasingly valuable. David, meanwhile, was struggling to adapt SmartFlow to compete with emotional intelligence capabilities his team couldn't legally implement. Nexus Dynamics' latest product announcements focused on incremental improvements to behavioral mapping, faster learning, more devices supported, better integration with existing systems. It was the classic innovator's dilemma. David had built a successful business around one approach to smart home automation, and now he was trapped by that success. Pivoting to emotional intelligence would require acknowledging that his current approach was outdated, while continuing with behavioral mapping meant falling further behind. The market was making its preference clear. Companies using my emotional intelligence technology were winning major contracts and receiving premium valuations, while behavioral mapping was becoming commoditized. 6 months after the award ceremony, I received an unexpected phone call. "Alex, this is David Kellerman. I think it's time we talked." David suggested we meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Menlo Park that was roughly halfway between our offices. I arrived early and chose a corner table, where we could have a private conversation without being overheard by other tech industry people who might recognize us. David looked older than I remembered, and I could see the stress of the past year in his face. The confident, charismatic mentor I'd once admired had been replaced by someone who looked tired and defensive. "Alex," he began after ordering coffee, "I want to acknowledge that our situation has become complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. "David, you stole my idea, built a company around it, and then gaslit me into thinking I wasn't qualified to pursue my own innovation. That's not complicated, that's fraud." He winced at the word fraud, but didn't deny it. "You're right. I handled the SmartFlow situation poorly. I convinced myself I was helping you by taking the idea in a direction you couldn't have pursued on your own. By excluding me completely and taking all the credit? By providing resources and expertise you didn't have." His voice was getting defensive despite his apparent attempt to be conciliatory. "Alex, you had a good concept, but you didn't have the business experience, the network, or the capital to make it successful. So you decided to steal it instead of helping me develop those capabilities." David was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. I told myself I was being pragmatic. Better to see the idea executed successfully by someone with experience than to watch you struggle and potentially fail. That wasn't your decision to make. No, he admitted. It wasn't. We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Then David looked up with something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. I'm sorry, Alex. What I did was wrong, and I've been paying for it ever since. Watching you succeed with technology that makes my work look primitive, it's been humbling. I'd imagined this conversation for 5 years, but now that it was happening, I felt less anger than I'd expected. David looked genuinely defeated, and I realized that his betrayal had ultimately done me a favor by forcing me to build something better. What do you want, David? I want to make things right. Nexus Dynamics is struggling to compete in the emotional intelligence space because of your patent portfolio. We need access to your technology, and you probably need manufacturing and distribution capabilities we can provide. He was proposing a partnership. After 5 years of competition, David wanted to work together. What are you suggesting? A licensing deal that gives us access to your emotional intelligence technology, combined with a joint venture that leverages both of our capabilities. You'd maintain control of the IP, but we'd share resources and market presence. It was a tempting offer from a business perspective. Nexus Dynamics still had significant distribution channels, manufacturing relationships, and marketing capabilities that could accelerate my technology's adoption. But I wasn't interested in helping David recover from the consequences of his own unethical behavior. David, 5 years ago, you had the opportunity to be my partner. You chose to be my betrayer instead. I'm not interested in rewriting that history now that it's convenient for you. His expression hardened slightly. Alex, business is about results, not personal grudges. We could build something bigger together than either of us can build separately. We could have built something together 5 years ago if you hadn't stolen my work and lied to my face about it. I stood up from the table. The answer is no. I don't need your help anymore, and I'm not interested in rehabilitating your reputation by association. As I walked away, David called after me. This industry is small, Alex. Burning bridges isn't smart business. I turned back to face him. David, I'm not burning a bridge. I'm choosing not to build one with someone who's already proven they can't be trusted. That conversation with David was the last time we spoke directly, but it wasn't the end of our story. Over the next year, the competitive dynamics between our approaches to home automation reached a decisive conclusion. My emotional intelligence platform continued to evolve and expand into new markets, while SmartFlow's behavioral mapping approach became increasingly obsolete. David's attempts to develop competing emotional intelligence capabilities were hampered by my patent portfolio and his team's lack of foundational expertise in the field. The tipping point came when Apple announced they were integrating my emotional intelligence technology into their entire ecosystem of products. Siri would become emotionally aware, Apple TV would adapt content based on viewer emotional states, and even the iPhone would adjust its interface based on user stress levels. The Apple partnership was worth $2.3 billion over 5 years and positioned my technology as the foundation for the next generation of human-computer interaction. Tim Cook personally announced the partnership at their annual keynote, calling emotional intelligence the missing piece that will make technology truly personal. David's response to the Apple announcement was telling. Nexus Dynamics immediately pivoted away from smart home automation, announcing they were exploring new opportunities in enterprise software solutions. SmartFlow would continue as a legacy product, but the company was essentially admitting defeat in the consumer AI space. The final nail in the coffin came 6 months later when Nexus Dynamics was acquired by IBM for less than their peak valuation. David stepped down as CEO as part of the acquisition, taking a VP role focused on strategic initiatives, corporate speak for being sidelined. Meanwhile, I was featured on the cover of Wire magazine with the headline, The Revenge of the Stolen Genius. The article detailed the full story of David's betrayal and my 5-year journey to build superior technology, positioning me as a cautionary tale about the importance of ethical leadership in tech. But the most satisfying moment came when I received an email from one of David's current employees, someone who'd been considering leaving Nexus Dynamics to join a startup. Your story gave me the courage to pursue my own ideas instead of staying in a comfortable but limiting situation, she wrote. If you could build something world-changing in a garage after being betrayed by your mentor, maybe I can build something meaningful too. That email reminded me why David's betrayal had ultimately been a gift. It had forced me to develop resilience, independence, and a deeper understanding of what I was truly capable of achieving. The success of emotional intelligence technology created ripple effects throughout the entire tech industry. Companies that had focused purely on functional capabilities were scrambling to add emotional awareness to their products. Universities were creating new research programs focused on human-centered computing. Venture capitalists were looking for the next emotional intelligence breakthrough. I used my platform to advocate for more ethical practices in technology development, particularly around intellectual property and mentor relationships. Speaking at conferences and universities, I would tell my story as a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting young innovators from exploitation. The tech industry has a mentorship problem, I would say during these presentations. Too often, experienced professionals use their position to extract value from younger colleagues rather than genuinely developing their capabilities. This hurts both the individuals being exploited and the overall pace of innovation. I also established the Chun Innovation Fund, which provided grants and legal support to young inventors whose ideas had been stolen or appropriated by more powerful parties. The fund helped dozens of cases in its first year, from small patent disputes to major corporate theft allegations. One of the fund's first major cases involved helping a young AI researcher whose groundbreaking algorithm had been appropriated by her PhD advisor. The advisor had published the work under his own name and was building a startup around it without crediting or compensating her for the foundational research. "This is exactly what happened to me," I told the researcher during our first meeting. "The difference is, you don't have to spend 5 years building something better to get justice. We're going to fight this directly." The case resulted in a $15 million settlement and the researcher receiving proper credit for her innovation. More importantly, it sent a message throughout academia and industry that intellectual property theft would face serious consequences. The emotional intelligence platform continued to evolve and expand. Within 3 years, it was powering millions of devices across dozens of product categories. Healthcare systems used it to monitor patient emotional states. Educational software adapted to student stress levels. Even automotive systems could detect driver emotions and adjust accordingly. But perhaps the most meaningful application was in mental health support. Therapists and counselors began using emotional intelligence technology to better understand their patients' emotional patterns and provide more personalized treatment. Alex's technology is helping us identify emotional triggers and patterns that patients themselves might not recognize, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a clinical psychologist, told me. It's not replacing human empathy, but it's enhancing our ability to provide effective support. The technology that had started as a way to automate smart homes had become a tool for understanding and supporting human emotional well-being on a massive scale. Looking back on the 5 years between David's betrayal and my ultimate success, I've learned that the most satisfying revenge isn't destruction, it's demonstration. Rather than trying to tear down what David had built, I focused on building something so superior that his achievements became irrelevant. This approach worked because it channeled negative emotions into positive outcomes. The anger and frustration from being betrayed became fuel for innovation, persistence, and excellence. Every late night in my garage workshop, every failed prototype, every moment of doubt was motivated by the desire to prove that David had made a terrible mistake by underestimating me. But the revenge was only satisfying because it served a larger purpose. I wasn't just building technology to spite David, I was building technology that genuinely improved people's lives. The emotional intelligence platform helped millions of users have better relationships with their devices and, by extension, with each other. The best revenge is massive success, as the saying goes, but I would add a crucial caveat. The success has to be meaningful, not just visible. Building wealth or fame for its own sake wouldn't have provided the same sense of vindication as building technology that changed entire industries. The other crucial element was patience. 5 years is a long time to pursue revenge, especially when you're working alone with limited resources while your target is enjoying fame and fortune. There were many moments when I questioned whether the effort was worth it, whether I should just move on and pursue different opportunities. But I learned that sustainable motivation comes from loving the process, not just the outcome. I genuinely enjoyed the technical challenges of building emotional intelligence technology. I found the research fascinating, the engineering problems engaging, and the potential applications exciting. If I had been motivated purely by anger at David, I probably would have burned out within a year or two. The emotional energy required to sustain that level of focused effort had to come from positive sources, curiosity, creativity, and the satisfaction of solving difficult problems. The revenge was the cherry on top, not the foundation of the effort. Success brought its own complications. As my technology became more successful and David's company declined, I started receiving criticism for being vindictive and unprofessional in how I handled our conflict. Some industry observers felt I should have been more magnanimous in victory, perhaps offering to help David transition his business or publicly acknowledging any positive aspects of our early mentorship relationship. Alex Chen's refusal to work with David Kellerman seems petty, wrote one tech blogger. The industry would benefit from collaboration between these innovative leaders rather than continued antagonism. I understood the criticism, but disagreed with it fundamentally. Ethical violations should have consequences, and David's betrayal of my trust wasn't something that could be resolved through polite collaboration. More concerning were the attempts by some people to rewrite history in David's favor. As his company struggled and my technology succeeded, narratives began emerging that portrayed David as a misunderstood visionary who had been unfairly vilified by a vindictive former protege. Maybe Kellerman's appropriation of Chen's ideas was inappropriate, one investor wrote in a Medium post, but his execution and vision turned those ideas into real products that benefited consumers. Chen's emotional intelligence work builds on foundations that Kellerman established. These revisionist accounts ignored the fundamental issue, consent and credit. Even if David had executed my ideas better than I initially could have, that didn't justify stealing them in the first place. I addressed this directly in interviews and public statements, always returning to the core principle. Innovation requires trust, and trust requires honesty about who creates what. You can't build a healthy industry on a foundation of intellectual property theft, regardless of how well the stolen ideas are executed. The other unexpected consequence was the pressure to be a spokesperson for all victims of intellectual property theft. I receive hundreds of emails from people who felt their ideas had been stolen, asking for advice, support, or direct intervention. While I try to help through the Chun Innovation Fund and public advocacy, I quickly realized that my specific situation, having the technical skills, resources, and persistence to build competing technology, wasn't applicable to most cases of IP theft. Not everyone can spend 5 years in a garage building breakthrough technology, I acknowledged during one interview. My story is inspiring, but it's not a practical solution for most people facing intellectual property violations. This led me to focus more on systemic solutions, better legal protections for inventors, stronger ethics education in business and engineering programs, and cultural changes that prioritize collaboration over appropriation. Today, 7 years after David first stole my SmartFlow concept, the technology landscape looks completely different. Emotional intelligence is a standard feature in consumer devices, behavioral mapping is considered outdated, and the entire smart home industry has evolved around human-centered design principles. My company, now called Empathy Technologies, employs over 1,200 people and has been valued at $12 billion in our most recent funding round. We're preparing for an IPO next year, which will likely value the company at over $20 billion. David, meanwhile, has largely disappeared from public view. After leaving IBM, he started a consulting firm focused on digital transformation for traditional industries, a niche that keeps him employed but far from the cutting-edge innovation he once claimed to lead. I occasionally see him at industry events where he's polite but distant. We don't speak beyond brief professional acknowledgments, and I'm comfortable with that arrangement. Our story has been told, justice has been served, and I see no value in rehashing old conflicts. The most interesting development has been watching a new generation of entrepreneurs who explicitly reference my story as inspiration for their own ethical standards. Young founders will approach me at conferences and say things like, "I want to build my company the right way, not the David Kellerman way." This suggests that the broader impact of our conflict extends beyond just my personal vindication or David's comeuppance. It's contributed to a cultural conversation about ethics in technology development that influences how the next generation thinks about intellectual property, mentorship, and competition. I've also been invited to teach a course at Stanford Business School called Ethics in Innovation, where I use case studies, including my own, to help future entrepreneurs navigate difficult moral decisions. The students are always fascinated by the David story, but they're even more interested in the 5-year journey of building something better. How did you stay motivated during the hardest parts? Is the most common question I receive. My answer is always the same. I fell in love with the problem I was solving, not just the revenge I was pursuing. The revenge motivated me to start, but the technology kept me going. If I could give advice to anyone facing a similar betrayal, it would be this. Channel your anger into excellence, but make sure the excellence serves a purpose beyond revenge. David's betrayal hurt because I cared about the relationship and trusted him completely. But it also revealed something important. I had been looking for validation from someone else instead of building confidence in my own capabilities. The 5 years I spent building emotional intelligence technology taught me that external validation, awards, recognition, media coverage, is satisfying but temporary. Internal validation, the satisfaction of solving difficult problems and creating something genuinely valuable, is sustainable and fulfilling. I also learned the importance of building systems rather than just products. David could steal my initial idea because it was just an idea. But he couldn't replicate my emotional intelligence platform because it was built on years of research, dozens of patents, and deep technical expertise that couldn't be easily copied. Build moats around your innovations, I tell young entrepreneurs. Make sure your competitive advantage comes from capabilities that take years to develop, not insights that can be copied in months. The other crucial lesson is about choosing your battles wisely. I chose to compete with David through superior technology rather than through litigation, media campaigns, or industry politics. This approach worked because I had the skills and resources to build something better, but might not work for everyone. Sometimes legal action is necessary. Sometimes public exposure is the right approach. Sometimes the best response is to walk away and focus on entirely different opportunities. The key is honest self-assessment. What are your strengths? What resources do you have? What outcome would actually satisfy you, and what's the most effective path to achieve it? In my case, I wanted to prove that David had made a mistake by underestimating me and stealing my work. The most convincing way to prove that was by building technology that made his theft look foolish in retrospect. But if my goal had been to recover damages, expose unethical behavior, or prevent him from hurting others, different strategies might have been more effective. As I prepare for our IPO next year, I often think about the parallel universe where David had been an ethical mentor instead of an exploitative one. In that universe, we might have built something great together. I might have learned valuable business skills while maintaining ownership of my innovations. The smart home industry might have evolved faster with our combined expertise. But I'm not sad about the path we didn't take. The betrayal forced me to develop capabilities I might never have discovered otherwise. I learned to trust my own judgment, to build complex organizations, to navigate sophisticated business challenges, and to persist through years of uncertainty and setbacks. Most importantly, I learned that my ideas were valuable not because David validated them, but because they solved real problems in innovative ways. That lesson has informed every decision I've made since, from hiring employees to choosing partnerships to setting strategic direction. The company I've built prioritizes ethical relationships and transparent communication in ways that directly reflect what I learned from David's betrayal. We have strict policies about intellectual property attribution, comprehensive protections for employee innovations, and cultural values that emphasize collaboration over appropriation. We build technology that understands human emotions, I told our team during a recent all-hands meeting, so we better understand human emotions in how we treat each other. This isn't just idealism, it's practical business strategy. Companies built on trust and ethical foundations are more sustainable, attract better talent, and create more innovative products than organizations based on exploitation and deception. David taught me that lesson through negative example, but it's been the foundation of everything positive I've built since. The award ceremony where I beat David for those 3 industry recognitions was satisfying, but wasn't the real victory. The real victory was building a company and technology platform that makes the world a little bit better while providing meaningful work for over 1,000 employees and value for millions of users. David stole my idea and became a celebrity CEO. But I took that betrayal and built something more valuable than anything he ever created. A sustainable, ethical, innovative company that will continue improving people's lives long after both of us are gone. That's the kind of revenge that actually matters, not destruction but creation. Not tearing down your enemies, but building something so good that their attacks become irrelevant. My mentor stole my startup idea and became famous for it. I spent 5 years building something better, and now his fame looks like a footnote in the story of what's actually possible when you combine technical excellence with ethical leadership. The best revenge isn't just success, it's making their betrayal look like the worst mistake they ever made while building something meaningful enough to outlast both the betrayal and the revenge. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But sometimes if you're willing to work hard enough and wait long enough, you can make something even better come true. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below.